All right. When Chandrika gets on, we'll be discussing a new secure agent feature in the platform. While we wait, are there any questions or any other topics folks wanted to discuss? If not, anyone new to the platform on the call? No? Okay. Well, if folks have any questions or topics they'd like covered in future office hours, always feel free to email voltron@pnnl.gov. Let's see. Dave Raker, just wanted to follow up on the UI discussion. Anything you need on that? Or are you looking to schedule a meeting or anything?
Not right now. They're on spring break, so
okay.
Yeah. When they get back, we'll see where they are, and we might want to have them talk to you guys.
Okay.
But so far, I think they got what they need.
Okay, great. And there's been some updates since we last talked as well. So
I did see that you'd push the Python 3 compatibility.
Okay. Just a second, I'll ping Chandrika. Chandrika, are you on?
Hi, Jimmy, I'm here.
Oh, sorry, I didn't. It was your payroll, not your name.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that. Okay. Well, so if you're ready, I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Sure. I'll go ahead and share my screen.
And so the feature that Chandrika is going to talk about is one that something that we've been considering for a long time, but it was as part of the threat profile work that the secure software capability team did, putting together a threat profile of the platform. This is one that bubbled to the top. And so she's been working on this along with others on the team, and will provide a way to protect the platform from the actions of agents. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Chandrika.
Okay. Is everybody able to hear me, and can you see my screen?
Yep, I can see. I can do both.
Okay. So this is, Johnny mentioned, is a security feature. And what we want to do is run every agent as a separate Unix user, so that each agent's access to files inside the Voltron home can be restricted to only what the agent needs. And so one agent cannot, say, open the config files or the database files of another agent, right? So right now, in the current state, Voltron, everything is running as the user with which the Unix user with which you start the Voltron platform. So there is, in theory, nothing stopping, say, an agent. If one agent knows the other agent's identity, it can go search for it and open the file. I say if you have an SQL historian, and if it's writing into a .SQLite file, there's nothing stopping one agent from opening that file or deleting that file. Or if you're using a RabbitMQ, there's nothing stopping it from reading the other agent's say public-private key files. Well, private key files are by default read-only for the platform, but still everybody's running as the same user, so you can still read it. So what we want to do is have each agent run as a separate user, and restrict access to all files created within Voltron Home as much as possible. Like by default, when platform or agent creates a file, it will now create it with restricted permissions, and we explicitly open access to files, like say, for example, the public key files, which needs to be accessed by the RabbitMQ user. By default, we open up permissions. So earlier it was like the default file permissions dependent on your default UMask, whatever is set in your environment. But right now what we do in this secure mode code is that when you set up Voltron to run in the secure mode, it will by default reduce the access of any file, reduce the access for any files or folders that you create by default, and the platform explicitly open up access. And the same would have to be done by agents files. So if an agent wants to create a file that is open for others, no, not and not just for the owner, then they have to explicitly set permissions for it. So how we do this is by giving limited set of pseudo access to the platform user. When I say platform user, I mean the existing Unix user as whom you're starting the platform. So going forward, I'm just going to say platform user for refer this as platform user. So when there is an initial setup script that you run as either an elevated pseudo user or a root user, which would give limited pseudo access to this platform user. And then the platform user can create users every time a new agent is installed and run that agent as that user. So this whole thing is we are using ACL for this, ACL library for this. So that is a pre-requirement. So you have to do your this is for secure mode, this becomes an additional prerequisite for Voltron. So you have to do an install ACL. If you're running your Voltron environment in, say, a Docker image, this might not be there by default, but standard Ubuntu should come with ACL installed already. So that's what we do. And so I'm going to show you this in action here. So let me point my Voltron home to a new directory. So CMQ_2. So right now, this doesn't exist. And so I want to start in this new Voltron home. And what I want to do is, before I can start the Voltron, I want to log in as either root or any user that has a sudo access. The Voltron platform user itself need not be a part of the sudo group. Only so because we don't want it to be by default being the part of sudoverse. We want to restrict the permissions permissions as much as possible. So in my development, when I have another window in which I'm root, so I'm going to run script secure user permission.sh. So this is a script that you have to run one time per instance, and this is going to ask you what's the Unix user in which you're going to use to run the platform, and the absolute path of the directory. So, and the instance name, and this is again needs to be unique for that particular instance, and it's going to set up sudo permissions based on that instance name, and I'll show you that in a minute. That's my instance. So what it does is essentially creates a set of etc sudoverse.d file entries in which it's saying, okay, my platform user has access to create create users of the pattern Voltron underscore something and add them. What it does is it adds all the users that this creates into a group called Voltron underscore the instance name. That's why it prompted you for the instance name. And anything, and the Voltron user, platform user, would have access to run any commands as any user within this group. So that's what this whole set of entry is doing. So it can it can create a user of a pattern called Voltron underscore something, and it adds those users to this group called Voltron underscore instance name. And for any user in that group, it can run commands as that user, and it can stop the processes that are started by that user. So those are the set of permissions that are pseudo permissions that are given to the Voltron platform user. So once I do that, what the script so this is essentially entries in the pseudoverse file. So it creates these in in a separate file in etc pseudoverse Voltron. So you can see this entries just got added. And then what it also does is in the Voltron home, because it's a new home that I just pointed to, it creates a config file and puts the instance name in it, and it also creates a new variable called secure agent users. We put it true, and when the Voltron starts and it sees this flag, it's going to say, okay, now I'm going to start everything with a more restricted UMask, and it's going to open permissions only when needed. And it also is going to launch agents as separate users. So, so if you say start, Voltron, go ahead and take the log. You can see Voltron starting in secure mode. I don't know if you saw that. So you can see in the log, it's reading the config file and it's saying, okay, I'm starting this from the secure config file, and now it's going to explicitly set up permissions in different directories, and it restricts files for whatever known host or the JSON. It goes checks all of them and says, okay, it sets up permissions for all those folders and files. So I'm going to stop it and I'm going to install a few agents so that I can show the agents in action. So I'm going to use the VCFG script for that. Thank you. I'm just going to get a historian and master driver going so we can see the two different agents running, and if agents are publishing data correctly and the historian is actually able to retrieve the data correctly and put it in the database. And we can also see the permissions set on the files created by the agents itself. That is taking a while. I want to install a master driver and a fake device so that it publishes something. Okay, so now if I do start Voltron, and so it's nothing is running now. So I wanted to show you just the directory permissions inside Voltron home. If you see inside agents, there are two, and you can see it's all owned by Voltron, but there is a plus sign which shows you it has an ACL set on these. And so say get FACL 6F. So it says, in addition to Voltron, who's the owner, which has read, write, execute permission, and the others don't have any access like this. Only the Voltron user and the group has read, write, execute, and the others don't have any access at all. And that's going to be the default permissions for any AF folders or files created by the Voltron platform itself. And then within that, it's going to explicitly add permissions to only the user. This is the user that was created for this agent. And if you see the same for the other agent, C7, and see this number, this is essentially a timestamp of when the agent was created. So it's just one way of creating unique users. So you can see that this folder has read and execute access to this user, whereas the other agent, 7C1, has only read, write, execute for this agent, this user. So the one user does not have even read or execute permission to the other agent's directory. And this username is saved in a file called user_ID. So if you do see, there's a user ID folder, and that's where the username is saved. So when you stop and restart an agent, it's not going to create a new user. It'll just pick up the username from this, and it'll restart the agent process with the same username. So I'm going to go ahead and start the agent. This is 7, and what was the other agent? 6. Okay. See, it's both are running now. So if you see, so 7 was SQL historian, and that user was, let's say that was the user name. So if I do search based on this, you can see that this SQL.historian Python program was launched using sudo -u and that particular username. And if you see the master driver, you can see it's now, that is launched with a different username ending with 6401. And you can stop and start agents. 7. And if I restart, it should not create a new user, but start with the same user ID again. It's starting it with this. And you can see in the logs, if all is well, you should see the publish Masterfig driver publishing messages, and SQLite also. You can see the SQL historian running and logging. And if you see the data permissions in this, the main agent restriction is not only on the read access, but also on the write access. Earlier, for example, for say SQL historian, but creates the SQLite file, the database file, you could configure it to point to anywhere. So by default, it could be in the Voltron home directory, or it could be in your under Voltron home /agent directory. You could configure it to anywhere. But in this secure mode, you cannot, you have to explicitly make sure that the directory that you're pointing to has permissions. So if you're pointing to a directory outside of Voltron home, then it's up, you can set the permissions however you want. But if you're pointing inside the Voltron home directory, any subdirectory, it's not going to have access by default. So and if you give just the name of the database, which is what I have which is how I have configured the SQL historian. So if you do a cat, and what was that? agents. SQL historian. It goes into this agent. Did I get it wrong? Historian agent. Artist info config. So in this, if I have given the config file has only platform.historian.sqlite. So what this does is in secure mode, it'll always put the files inside the agent data directory, because inside the in the agent install directory, the agent data directory is the only folder in which the agent would have read-write access to agent data. So you can see inside the agent data directory, it has read-write access, and all the files, these are the files that are created by the agent running agent user, whatever the agent, Unix user that's running the agent. And it has read-write access only to owner. So that way, say the master driver agent, which is running as a different user, will not be able to even read these files, read the database files. Any questions so far? Okay. And one thing to note is that the Voltron home directory itself should be readable for both agent users and the platform users. This shouldn't be a problem in most environments, but I did run into a CentOS Docker image in which the default permissions for user home, which is my Unix user, right? Like /home/Chandrika was by default had read write execute only for the user called Chandrika and didn't have anything else. And by default, Voltron home gets created under the Unix users home. So if you don't configure a Voltron home, it goes under home Chandrika whatever .Voltron, and the .Voltron folders didn't have any read or execute permissions at all. And so the platform user or the agent users couldn't access it. So that's an issue that I ran into. So I documented that as a note, because we don't want to explicitly change permissions for a user home in a Unix environment. So, but wherever you point, so I just put it as a note, like something to note. Wherever you're pointing your Voltron home directory as, and that home directory should have read and execute permissions for your platform user and agent user. Okay, so now I'm going to stop Voltron, and you can switch from ZMQ to Rabbit, ZMQ to RabbitMQ, or vice versa, and the secure mode code should take care of creating the additional files. For example, if you switch from ZMQ to RMQ, you have to create additional folders such as RabbitMQ certificates and setup, and clamp down permissions for the public private key folders. So that'll also be taken care when you're running in secure mode. It does this check at time of agent startup. So you could have started a Voltron instance with installed agents in ZMQ, and then when you switch to RMQ, the security lockdown process happens instead of at the install time, it happens at the startup time of the agent. So what I'm going to do is so suppose I say RMQ, and then so that I create all root certificates created for this instance. I'm just giving dummy entries. this. And it's going to create a new RabbitMQ conf with the certificate generated. Start the RabbitMQ server with this new configuration, and then start the Voltron server to point to this RabbitMQ. Okay, I have all the certificates and set up. So start the Voltron. My agents. You can see it started fine. Now it's counting existing rows, which means it's starting from where it left off. And it's running fine. So that's the second thing I wanted to show. This mode definitely does come with one big caveat is like, no, two actually. One is like, once you set up an instance in secure mode, please don't switch back to insecure mode, because we have not done any testing for that mode, and we don't want this to happen either, because everywhere it's clamped down. So if you want to switch back to regular mode, then you have to manually go change permissions everywhere based on what agents created, and each agents could have created numerous files. So the Voltron platform won't have control over what all it should open up permissions for. So that's something that we're not going to support at the platform level. So we do not recommend switching from secure to regular mode. You could go from regular to secure mode. So if you have an existing instance which is not with installed agents, and if you want to convert that instance into a secure mode, you could do that, but provided there are two caveats. One is if you have agents such as SQL historian or something else which writes files to, say, random directory, right? Like Voltron home, those have to be moved into the agent data directory. You have to change your agent's configuration file to write to the agent data directory, so that the agent user has write access only to that folder. And and of course the Voltron process and the agents have to be restarted to take for the secure mode to take effect. And so that's like the two big caveats. And if you want, I can show that in action, but I'm not sure how many of you are interested in doing something like that. Any questions so far, or do you have any concerns about this secure mode?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So when it's creating usernames,
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible for it to actually create meaningful usernames? Yeah, instead of the random numbers, that you can tell what user is which.
The reason why we went with like a Voltron underscore something is so that we don't clash with any existing users.
I mean, so it's like, say, Voltron underscore the VIP identity of that, and maybe plus a random number if you need.
Yeah, we did think about this. The main problem that we ran into is the size length, right? Typically, if you want to create users and groups, it has like how many characters? James, maybe you can help me here. How many characters was the restriction? Is it 32?
If I remember correctly, it's 24, but I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, there's a restriction on the total number of lengths. So initially we were like, okay, Voltron underscore instance name underscore agent name. And it got too long. So because the agent name can be like an arbitrary long string, No,
Right.
so the whole thing will not be a valid Unix name or a Unix group,
Are
right?
tags limited in length?
I got a question for you. One of the things that I think gets to the root problem that Dave's talking about is being able to identify which user goes with what. What if on Voltron control you added a flag to show you which user was acting as which agent?
We
And that
could
way
definitely do
determine
that. That would be a really good addition. We can like right next to the identity, we can put a username column so that when you do a VCTL status, it'll show you with the username. Right now, the user ID is put in a user_ID file inside the agent install directory, but I agree that it will really be useful to put it as a part of your Voltron control status.
Yeah, it would definitely be better to have it somewhere you can easily get to it.
right.
There are some additional.
You might be able to specify a short tag to give in the setup of the username too, so that you could, where it's clear that it has a limited number of characters or something.
We could add a tag,
Label
but
might be
do you?
better.
I mean,
Label might be a better word.
so do you want to say tag_1, tag_2, or tag_agent name is what you're thinking?
I was thinking just like you're doing, like Voltron _ label name is the username or something like that.
Oh, but do you want to give a tag for each agent so that it's?
Well, tag might be a little overloaded here, but if you can specify a label that you give that agent, that will be in its username, then you could easily identify the username and you could more easily restrict the length.
And VC is sort of an optional feature, David?
Yeah, we could do that actually.
It wouldn't have to be a default, but
Okay.
as an optional feature, that'd be nice.
Yeah, that'd be good to add, I think, as a part of like the agent install, maybe. Like, do you want to?
Yeah, use this
Yeah.
label along with the username.
Yeah, that just makes management a year later when you're not sure what's
Right.
what a little easier. So you're not digging through files to find out which file belongs to whom.
Yeah, we could definitely do that. That's
I think those are really good ideas. Yeah.
I think that's a really good idea. The only time we might run into issues, well, not really. It's an optional feature, so we should not run into issue. But only time we'll not do that is if you are switching from an insecure mode to a secure mode. If you have existing installs,
Yeah.
So it won't have that tag. But
the things in the agents directory, it would be kind of neat if they had something like that too, but that's not the end of the world. Like just the directory names in the .voltron/agents directory.
Oh, so you don't have to go into it to see what agent goes with that UUID.
I mean, you can pull up VCTL and see what the UUID is to figure it out. But
no, I think immaterial of what the name of the user is.
That's not as important.
We can I think I think the two really good suggestions here. One is to have like a prefix or a tag for your agent. That can be given, and you can say underscore, random numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can, and then the second one is have that username displayed as a part of Voltron control status, so that you can quickly see what are the what agent is running as what user. With those two together,
I think so.
Okay, that's excellent points. I'll definitely make a note. Any other suggestions or issues that you think that might crop up in secure mode? I mean, this code is not merged into develop. I've just finished it, and there's a PR open for it, and others in the team are testing. So this would be a good time to add any good features like suggestions, improvements.
And it's not, as you said, there's insecure mode, right? So it's not required. So if you're worried that this is going to add too much complexity to your install, then.
Yeah, that's true. But it's for people who are worried about like, oh, yeah, one agent has proprietary data, somebody else should not see it, and
Well, and it's a way to, so it protects you in several different ways, right? So right now, most installations, you know who the developer of the agent is. In some future state, maybe where there's like an app store and you pull down an agent, then this would be one way to protect you from that case. But in the short term, it protects you from an agent, accidentally running amok, or it prevents, it prevents agents from getting into files that they shouldn't get into, basically, whether that's inadvertent or malicious. And so it's an important feature, and one that we've been looking at for a while, and I think has a lot of good potential for increasing not only the security but just the stability, because you don't have to worry about agents accessing files they shouldn't be accessing in a certain way and then stomping on each other or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really good feature.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely one that came out of the threat profile work, and it's like, okay, yeah, that bumps it up to the top priority because we've already been thinking about it. So previously we talked about doing containers per agent, but that never really panned out, and so this is was a way to get the most of the functionality we wanted, and hopefully a not too burdensome way.
I think this is a much better solution than the container idea.
Yeah.
Eventually would have. The only
Yeah, I think so too.
that I see is being able to restrict, like we used when the restrict resources for individual agents. That's the only thing that I see we could potentially leverage this to add to it. But I don't think that needs to come in before the pull request is done.
Right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, the resource restriction, that's not part of this, but the
Yep.
protecting, the containerization of agents, that gets us what we wanted from that in a much simpler way.
Yep.
There's another thing that I noticed, like while testing, like when you're having agent created files inside the agent data, now the owner and the group are the agent users, but the platform user also does not have access to it, at least currently. So is it something that would be useful to make the platform user the group owner of the files so that the platform user still has access? I'm open to suggestions. It was just something that I noticed. I thought, okay, somebody has suggestions for it, I can incorporate it.
Well, and that stuff will come out as people start using it. David, do you think this is something that you might implement at Toledo?
Possibly, yeah. We're likely to be deploying some new systems, so I'll at least give it a try on some of the new things that we're looking to deploy.
Okay.
Yeah. As for the platform user having access, I think that's probably good for management. I don't know if there's a corner case where that'd be a problem.
Right. If you're the platform, you should be able to have access to the things running in you.
I think generally, yeah.
Yeah, the platform has platform can still call the agent and say query, but it cannot directly. The platform is log into Unix and directly say edit the file or something.
Okay.
That's the access that I was talking about.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Now, does this affect at all how things show up in the journal? I guess we're looking at it there, so probably not.
What
you mean in the log?
In the log?
Yeah.
Oh, the log. Okay,
I usually use journal control to look at things.
Oh, I see.
Oh, okay. The log file is something that if you just do start and stop Voltron, that by default writes it to the Voltron.log file called Voltron.log, and it opens up permission for the log. But if you do Voltron minus VV, and then minus L something, and there is nothing stopping you from pointing to a folder or file anywhere, which the Voltron platform user might have access, but the agent user might not have access to it. And in that case, agent's log will not show up because agent is running as a different user. This is another, to note point that I added in the documentation. So thanks for bringing it up. So if you're pointing the log to some random file here, please make sure that that file has read-write access to others and not just the owner of the file.
We're typically running as a system service on everything that we do, and then we just use the system journal to look at the logs rather than writing a separate log file.
That should be fine.
Okay.
We tried that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you, Chandrika, for the presentation, and thanks, Dave, for the suggestions.
Inputs,
Those
yeah.
are all good. Anything that increases the usability is a definite need.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on that? If not, then the remainder of the time is for open topics. Anybody have questions or research that they'd like to highlight? We're always interested in hearing what folks in the community are doing with the platform, how they're using it, their use cases, their features that they might need or are adding themselves, or if people are looking for ways to contribute and interested in hearing what issues are available, then we're always interested in discussing that.
This is Michael from Protocol Labs. I have one question on that front. Also, fantastic presentation with the security stuff. I've always been super impressed with like the emphasis on that as far as Voltron's concerned, which is so cool. I was wondering, in terms of getting multiple Voltron instances talking to each other, if anyone's aware of any particular research or implementations that are like focused on how specifically best to control those talking to each other. I'm thinking in particular of some of the work that I think it's J.D. Taft is doing in like the hierarchy and laminar coordination frameworks sort of stuff. But if this also just sounds like word vomit, I apologize.
So are you thinking like how many Voltrons, like a hierarchy of different Voltron instances talking to each other, or?
Yeah, and like specifically using that to sort of set up a sort of like hierarchical levels of control or interaction in that respect.
Yeah, so you would have a dozen or so Voltrons controlled by some kind of coordinator instance who's then talking to some higher level instance.
And like I imagine a Voltron Central kind of agent might be particularly useful for that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so at one level, that's what we're doing on our own campus. We've got Voltron instances on the campus network who are collecting data and then sending that all to a central Voltron instance. I don't know that we've had any experiments where agents are doing something on that central instance, but that certainly would be supported. All that data is going there, so you could have an agent doing some cross-cutting analysis, subscribing to data across topics there. And certainly, right now, because the purpose is just to collect all the data is being shipped there, but you could have agents on those local collection boxes doing some kind of analysis and only sending the results up to the Voltron Central instance, to save bandwidth and to just save storage, and just the most pertinent data gets sent there, and try to do as much analysis at the edge as possible. And then the instance at that Voltron Central instance then can do the same, collect all the data it's seeing from its collection, from its subordinates and then do some kind of analysis and send the results up higher up the chain. And then control actions come back down. So from the highest level down to the lower level. That was one of the original design goals for the platform, was that kind of hierarchy.
Got it. Yeah. Is there much sort of published, like, describing that particular instance that you guys have set up there?
We did a scalability study a while ago, but that's probably out of date. Shweta, did you want to, maybe you could talk about the options in RabbitMQ real quick? Shweta, you on? You're muted if you are.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. So for RabbitMQ, we have we haven't tested the hierarchical setup, but if you have, so you can set it up using federation. Once you set those instances up with federation, you can set up in RabbitMQ. When you set up federation, you have a hop count as well, where you can specify the hop count if you want to transfer the messages one level up or 2 levels up and so on. So there are features like this that you can manipulate in RabbitMQ that allows you to transfer messages up the hierarchy if interested. However, I've not tested more than one level above. So, and if you just want to move messages between one instance to another, just like a forwarder, we have a shovel plugin that can be set up to transfer messages. So that's another feature that you can look into.
Cool. Yeah, I'll check all that out. Thanks very much.
Yeah, and let us, we'd be happy to continue this conversation with you and explore that space.
Yeah, I'll do some digging and get back. Thank you.
Yep, thanks. All right, any other questions? All right, then we can call that a meeting. And as always, suggest topics, suggest research that you want to cover, and we'll put you onto the agenda. And so with that, thanks everybody. Have a good weekend and stay healthy.
That's more important, I guess. Stay healthy. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Yeah, I put that in the wrong order.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.